Thank you very much for joining us, folks. Welcome to today's Sovereignty Twitter space, where we're joined by Eden Yago, Jameson Lopp, and Adam Neuman once he gets on board. Here we go. Nick, sorry.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey. Yep, sorry. And Nick is on board. So before we get into it, guys, could we ask everyone to give a quick introduction for our audience? Yago, can we start with you?
Sure. So I used to be a neuroscientist focused on biotech. And I randomly got into Bitcoin when I was reading a paper which I thought was a regular paper about network science, and turned out it was a Satoshi white paper. It blew my mind. This was back in 2011, and I had, a few months later, kind of became all Bitcoin all the time. There's been a lot of ups and downs and learning along the way, and it's been extremely exciting to watch Bitcoin grow and mature. One of the things I was always very excited about was decentralizing all aspects of dealing with Bitcoin. And I always thought that multi-sig smart contracts could be used to do that. And then one of the other things I always was really concerned about was security and safety of Bitcoin. Especially back in the early days, it was very easy to think you were keeping or hodling your Bitcoin securely when you actually weren't. And I managed to outsmart myself and lock myself out of one of my wallets. And so when Casa came around, I was very excited by it. I think it's a extremely unique product. I don't think anything like it exists. Certainly not outside of Bitcoin, but even within the Bitcoin space. I was an early adopter of Casa, and I once spent several hours on the phone with part of their team trying to figure out an early UI bug. And so it's extremely exciting for me to have Jameson and Nick and the opportunity to talk to you guys. Hey, yeah.
I remember that, and I'm still indebted to you for helping us figure that one out. That was like 2 years ago. Okay,
Nick or Jason, you want to?
Yeah, I
can
introduce myself. So I'm Nick. I'm the CEO at Casa. For those who aren't familiar with Casa, we are really just trying to make holding private keys and self-custody as simple and safe for people as possible. We really think it's absolutely critical that the industry as a whole, like people, when they hold their Bitcoin, are able to do that where they are their own bank and where they are self-custodying their Bitcoin. And what stopped people from doing that historically has really been the user experience and the security and risk of loss around it. You have to really be advanced, and I think in order to do it right. And I think a lot of people forget that. And so Casa has built our product to make that easier for people of all levels of Bitcoin holding. And this is the mission that we continue to be really working hard towards, because we think it's just critical for the success of the overall Bitcoin network. So I'm sure we'll get into more stuff around this, but yeah, that's a quick intro for me.
All right. Yeah, so I've been a Bitcoin enthusiast for a decade now, and I've been working full-time on Bitcoin self-custody and specifically multi-signature solutions for that for 7 years. The first few years I was working in a company called BitGo, basically building out an enterprise infrastructure to help exchanges and other large custody providers better manage their wallets. And then it was a pretty small pivot for me to take a lot of what I had learned over the years and focus on trying to bring a similar level of security and ease of use to the individual to really continue to build out this promise of everyone being their own bank, because I felt like it had still really been out of reach of most people, including myself from a usability standpoint, because I was finding that I was basically having to spend an entire weekend every year updating my cold storage setup and if it was that onerous for me, I knew it had to be too onerous for most people to do what I considered the best practices. So Casa is, you can basically think of Casa as a guided experience where we focus on the user interface and build that in such a way that it really guides you down to following the path of best practices so that you don't have to spend hours, days, weeks learning all of the minutiae and in and outs of private key management.
Yeah, so that's like always the most terrifying weekend of the year, right? It's when you're making sure you still have access to all of your coins, right? I think we've all gone through that experience of, you've got cold storage, you choose to move something, or you try to secure your, make sure that you properly still got access to all of your seeds or your wallets. And for me at least, it's like it's terrifying. I always need to do it with someone else, just and some and have a stiff drink afterwards.
A lot of people tend to try to avoid it, honestly. I think Jameson might have coined this on another podcast we were on like a year ago or something, but we call it Schrödinger's Bitcoin. As long as you don't check as to whether you have your Bitcoin still safe on your hardware wallet buried in your backyard or whatever, you haven't necessarily lost it. And a lot of people take that approach, and some of those people, it ends up screwing them, honestly. And so that's why we actually try to get people, 2 to 4 times a year checking on their Casa setup, and that's built into part of the app. It's just when you are holding your own keys, the hygiene around just checking in, making sure that things are okay is super important.
Right.
So your Bitcoin doesn't end up in a landfill.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Like
One
some
thing
people.
I'll also point out, just in case some of you don't know, I think Jameson has put together what may be the best set of resources in Bitcoin anywhere. If you guys go to lopp.net, Bitcoin information, that's Bitcoin-information, and it has to be, it's a legendary resource for anyone who's interested in Bitcoin.
Yeah, the easier vanity domain is just bitcoin.page. Will take you directly there.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So we've spoken a little bit about Casa. Maybe you guys would like to actually describe a little bit about Casa, what it does today, what it's designed to do, and maybe a little bit about how it came to be.
What was that? What was the last part? Maybe a little bit about what?
How it came to be.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. So starting off with how Casa came to be, I guess, is a good place to start. So we really, Casa actually started as a home sharing company back in like 2016, and it was going to be built on Blockstack, and your private key kind of represented your identity. And this was back when Blockstack was V1 of Blockstack. It looks totally different today. And anyway, what we realized was that there was this huge problem where if people lost their private key that represented their account on the chain, then you just lost everything and you lost all of your history. And so that was something that was just like basically smacked us in the face with kind of like, this is a problem that needs to be solved before you can successfully build anything else on top of these things. And so that was when there was a big pivot, and we really started focusing on how do we make it really simple for people to hold their own keys and not have to worry about losing them. So today, the way that we accomplish that is we use multi-sig, which is a very technical, kind of scary sounding word, but in practice, when you're actually using the product, it's really simple. So it basically means instead of just having one private key that protect your Bitcoin, you've got multiple keys and they all protect that one pool of Bitcoin. And you only need some of those keys to actually send it. So for example, you've got 3 keys. One key is on your phone, one key is on a hardware wallet, and one key is held by Casa. And if you lose your hardware wallet, you make a mistake, you're human, that's okay. You can actually still use the phone key and that key held by Casa to access your Bitcoin. And you just, instead of having to worry about, oh, do I have my seed phrase stored safely and all of that, you just replace that hardware wallet and use the other two keys to still recover your coins. And so that's a model that just adds significantly more resilience to people's Bitcoin setup. And what we hear frequently over and over again from our customers was, this was 10 times easier to set up than I thought it would be. I was thinking this would be this huge leap going from using my ledger to using multi-sig. Turns out it's not. And the second one is I feel 10 times better about my security than I did before. And it's just something that it's a very emotional thing almost for the customers that we talk to. So it's something that really is rewarding to be building and working on. And I think that gives a pretty good overview. Jameson, is there anything else that you would add to that, just from a philosophy or like how we've built things perspective?
I would say one of the primary differences between us and your average Bitcoin wallet is that we focus on protecting the user from themselves. And I think a lot of the Bitcoin wallets out there provide a lot of different advanced features, and that, that's cool if you're a power user. But we aren't really aiming for the power user who wants to be using crazy non-standard aspects of the protocol, because in many cases there's a lot of potential foot guns there. So from a Casa wallet like user experience standpoint, we strive for simplicity. We actually purposefully don't let you do a lot of things because we think that the risk is not worth the reward.
So one of the maybe I can describe it a little bit from my experience as a user. So the huge advantage of multi-sig, right? So is you have more than one key. So if you lose one key or something happens to one of the keys, you have backups. You can also spread those keys around. You can give them to people you trust. You can put one in a safe. You can keep them in different locations. And this really helps diversify the security setup that you have. One of the cool things about Casa is that you do this in a very, very simple interface, which is basically an app on your phone. You can do it like Bitcoin. In other words, it's completely, you can keep yourself and your account completely pseudonymous, but you can also have Casa manage one of the backup keys for you. And so that they can help you recover your account if you need to. And one of the unique things about Casa is that Casa has taken the approach that users shouldn't have paper wallets, which is, almost everyone, including Ledger and Trezor and everyone, always propose that you should have a backup seed, a paper wallet. It's not exactly a paper wallet, but it's sort of like, you on a piece of paper,
your
you
seed
have
phrase
the
on
seed.
it written down.
Yeah. You have your seed written out, right? And that, obviously, anyone gets a hold of that, and that's a single point of failure. So maybe you guys want to just talk briefly about your philosophy around seed phrases.
Yeah, so our main philosophy here is that seed phrases are a point of failure that is an unencrypted point of failure. So if somebody finds that seed phrase, they have access to that key, and they could write that seed phrase down and you would have no idea that they got access to that key. So that's the first point. They're a single point of failure. The second point is that generally they're just a bad user experience. So like the average person is not used to writing down a 24-word phrase on a piece of paper and having to find somewhere safe to put that. I would argue that most people are probably keeping these on their computers in a notes file or in a password manager or something like that. People just don't have the security expertise to really manage these well. And so when you combine the fact that they're a single point of failure that anybody can find and get access to your key without you knowing, and then the fact that people are generally very bad at securing these seed phrases, we just think that seed phrases in general are not advisable for the majority of people using Bitcoin. And when you combine the fact, or when you take into account the fact that you have multiple keys protecting your Bitcoin with multi-sig, it's no longer a necessity that if you lose a key, you must restore that key. Whereas if you have a single key wallet, you do need to be able to restore it in case of loss. But when you've got multiple keys, you don't need to restore it. And so you don't actually need that seed phrase anymore. And so with that model, we think it makes it significantly stronger security, but also a significantly better user experience to just get rid of seed phrases or keep fewer of them. Now, one thing that we do say, because for some of the people who are OG Bitcoiners that are our customers, they have saving their seed phrase burned into their habits forever. And so we don't enforce that people get rid of their seed phrases. We just think that that's going to be the future for the majority of people using Bitcoin. However, they're your keys. So for the people who want to keep their seed phrases, they feel better having them. That's totally fine. It's not a requirement that to use Casa's product, you have to get rid of your seed phrases. We have no way to enforce that.
Yeah, so it's a question of, how do we help the average person be able to protect this material, which is, you can essentially think of it as almost like a toxic waste. You have to be very, very careful with how you handle it. And what we're really worried about is the physical security of, well, if you're storing a clear text seed phrase, this is just private keys sitting out in the open, how do you then enforce some sort of physical security around that? Well, I guess you could put it in a bank vault or something, but that's kind of silly and like defeating the purpose of what we're trying to do here. Alternatively, you could start using encryption technology to prevent physical attackers from accessing that private key material, which makes sense given the space that we're in. However, what you find is that you start going down this weird rabbit hole of chasing your own tail, where now you have another private key that is used to encrypt and decrypt that seed phrase, and now you have to find somewhere to securely put that private key material, and so it can very easily turn into a nightmare of over complexity. So we're certainly not against having backups of key material. We just want to do it in user-friendly ways. And one reason why we're fans of having one of the keys on your phone, which may, to an OG security person, they may be aghast at, suggesting having a key on a internet-connected device. But one of the major improvements that you can get from that is actually having automated encrypted backup mechanisms. And so we have this sort of 2 of 2 backup that happens with your mobile key, where we store an encrypted version of it on your iCloud or Google, and that's encrypted in a way such that even iCloud and Google can't see what the actual key is. And the decryption key for that is actually stored and secured by Casa with our HSM. So, we don't have access to it either, but it requires this sort of 2 of 2 recombination mechanism happening. If you, for example, lose your phone, it's fine. You just go buy a new phone, log into your iCloud and your Casa account, and it will automatically suck down the appropriate material, both from Casa and from your cloud account, be able to decrypt and reconstitute that mobile key. So, that's all happening automatically in the background, and people aren't having to worry about doing any sort of like manual encryption or crazy convoluted physical security problems in order to keep that key safe.
Awesome. So for those of you who've just joined, we're talking to Nick and Jameson, CEO and CTO of what I think is probably the best, most user-friendly, most secure Bitcoin wallet, Casa. The way this works is we're going to have a conversation with them, and then if there are questions from the audience, we're going to do that in the second part of the conversation. So the first part of the conversation is without audience participation. So coming back to our conversation, I think what got me really excited about Casa is the the way I see Bitcoin, and it's this tool for self-sovereignty, right? Empowering individuals to be in control of their lives, make their own decisions. That's what sovereignty is. And there's this ladder that you climb, right? Initially, you don't know about Bitcoin. You're, you know, not very sovereign at all. Then you start doing your own research. That's the first step. Then you buy some Bitcoin, but maybe you're holding it on Coinbase or some other centralized exchange. So you have, you've taken a step, but you're not self-custodying. You actually don't control your Bitcoin, not your keys, right? And then the next step is need now to figure out how to truly become self-sovereign by taking control of your keys. And at that point, maybe you can expand upon that and take control of other aspects as well. And one of the key things is if we want to see a world like that, we need to make it so that you don't have to be technical to be free. We need to make it so that it's easy and in fact attractive. It's easier to be in control of your own keys than to rely on a third party. One of the big advantages that self-custody has, for example, is you don't have the frictions of KYC. You don't have limits. You always have access. And so there's self-custody has many sort of user or UX benefits. But you guys have been really wrestling with this for a long time. And I'm curious what some of the biggest lessons you've learned around providing people that kind of control has been. And where do you think it's going from here?
So I think the biggest lessons we've learned are that just simplicity is key as much as possible. It's just really easy to overestimate how easy something is to do as somebody who has been doing it for years. But then when you get somebody who's completely new coming in to try this out for the first time, some of the things are just mind-blowing for them, and it's pretty scary. And so building out the right user experience to be incredibly simple, to explain what's going on, and then supplementing that with a strong customer support and service element, and then also content that helps people to educate themselves on what's going on and how this stuff works is just so important. And I would say we've done a ton of work on this, but it still doesn't feel like enough. It feels like something we're always pushing to improve on, because that's how important it is to help people through this process, because it's just they're changing a very fundamental human behavior with what they are when they're trying to take control of their own keys. And so it's just a totally different thing for people. And I think a lot of the Bitcoin community that has been here for a while thinks that it's relatively easy to get up to speed on, and there's just so many people that don't want to spend that time getting up to speed on it. And so you have to really do it for them with the product and with some of the support that you offer. As far as where we see things going, I mentioned earlier, I think self-custody is critical. Mass adoption of self-custody is critical for the success of our industry as a whole, because there's fundamental security differences between Bitcoin and the legacy financial system that make it so that the kind of tropes or methods that we used to secure money in the traditional financial system just really don't work for Bitcoin. It really boils down to the fact that Bitcoin transactions are irreversible. So if in the traditional financial system, if somebody steals your credit card or hacks your bank account and logs in and moves some money out, you just call your bank and say, hey, claw this back, and they go do that. But when you are keeping your Bitcoin on an exchange and they log in, somebody tricks you into giving them your username and password, or they find it in a password dump online and they basically hack your account. If they move the Bitcoin out, there's zero recourse there. And so that means that people can lose their Bitcoin relatively easily with their own account getting hacked. And it's just something that it's not sustainable, and it will ruin trust in Bitcoin as money. People are never going to store a significant amount of value in Bitcoin as a store of value if they can lose it all with one theft or one mistake. So that's critical for us to educate people on and solve going forward. But I think if we do that right, it works with you, because there are clear downfalls to using a centralized custodian. And so that with the right self-custody experience, that security benefit works with you. I think then the other thing that's going to be really interesting to see, because for some people there's just that security kind of mindset will just never push them over the edge to taking control of their own keys. Well, what happens when some of the things they actually want to do with their Bitcoin require them to hold their own keys? Because Bitcoin at its core is a permissionless and open network. And so that means that anybody around the world can be building on it, right? Well, if your custodian of choice isn't giving you access to what's being built on this permissionless network, but if you are holding your own keys, you can do whatever you want. You can access whatever you want. That's a pretty clear driver for people. And I think that over time, that will actually become a stronger driver than the security mindset, because people, a very big kind of psychological driver or creator of initiative for people is them wanting to do something with a product, with their assets, their Bitcoin, whatever. And so as we start to see more things getting built on top of Bitcoin that you have to hold your own keys in order to take advantage of these, I think that's going to be really helpful for bringing more people over to the self-custody side of things.
So that's I think that's brings me to a question which people ask about Casa, which is, why are you guys focused on Bitcoin only? What are the differences between Bitcoin and other assets which have made you choose to focus on Bitcoin?
So it really comes down to Bitcoin. We strongly believe Bitcoin has won the battle, I guess, for best form of non-sovereign or sovereign money, not run by a nation state. And it's the biggest market and has the best opportunity to change the world from that kind of fix the money, fix the world perspective. So that's where we've really focused our time, because we are a security team at our core. And with security, you cannot make a mistake. If you make a mistake, you have a significant chance that you ruin your brand reputation, you lose your customers' money. It's just a bad situation. And so with the resources that we have, we've just decided we are focusing on those resources on Bitcoin today, because that's where we can have the biggest impact. There are some other technical under the hood kind of reasons as well, which come down to the fact that Bitcoin's the only protocol that has native multi-sig. So that's something to, none of the other protocols really have multi-sig built into the protocol itself. And so that makes it more secure and easier to be building specifically our product on top of Bitcoin.
What about the fact that, or to what extent do you think that Bitcoin holders treat self-custody differently, right? So I have the sense that, you know, a lot of people who hold Bitcoin hold all kinds of different crypto assets. But when they are thinking about their Bitcoin, they're using a different mental model than when they're thinking about the other crypto assets, right? The other crypto assets are, uh, more like high risk or gambling or speculative. You constantly see in DeFi or in exchanges, large hacks, frequently what is being stolen are these other assets. People are more used to experiencing and dealing with the potential for total loss with other assets. Whereas I think a lot of people are thinking about Bitcoin as, the gold in the vault, the savings accounts, the retirement fund, right? And so they have a different attitude. Is that has this impacted your thinking as well?
So I I guess as an overall point here, I try to be super neutral when I'm analyzing and thinking about these kind of Bitcoin versus other cryptocurrency questions. And I can actually see two sides to this, right? So on one side, I agree with you that I think some people view Bitcoin as the best store of value. It's kind of their base unit of account in their personal lives, and maybe they're owning other crypto, but they're using it to try and they're trading it to try and increase their Bitcoin stack or whatever. And so in that scenario, they're thinking about their Bitcoin security in a different way, and they want to make sure that they have the most secure kind of, I'm not moving it, self-custody. Whereas maybe if you're trading a bunch of other stuff, you're keeping it on an exchange or something like that. But um, in the interest of trying to evaluate these things from a neutral perspective, I think that other ecosystems right now have done a better job of giving people who are holding their own keys things to do with those assets that you can only do when you're holding your own keys. So you take a look at DeFi as an example, and you really can only interact with that when you are holding your own keys. And so I think there's a significant portion of the Ethereum, or name your other chain, that has DeFi participants that are actually self-custodying because they want to participate in some of these different applications built on top of the chain that don't really exist in a fully fledged form directly on top of Bitcoin today. So, and whereas you could probably make an argument that, like, for people who aren't moving their Bitcoin around a bunch, maybe there isn't that incentive. And so for the people who don't care about the security side, they're just keeping more of their Bitcoin with a custodian, like a Coinbase custody or something like that. So I think there's actually two different sides to that argument that are both pretty interesting to think through. And that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, definitely. It's different use cases, right? So, with Bitcoin, at least on chain, you're more likely to have people think of it in terms of long-term savings or vault. Of course, we are seeing higher touch points happening with people that are using Lightning and doing payments and powering games and other types of applications there. And, they're obviously going to be using a riskier type of security model with how they're operating with their private keys there. But then for more of the, what you might call a kitchen sink type of smart contracting protocols that are doing just innumerable different types of functionality, then I think this is the extreme end of convenience over safety in many cases, where I think the default is for a lot of people to be using essentially like a browser extension, MetaMask style wallet that is not really secure at all, but is so convenient that it allows them to easily interact with any number of different websites that are basically integrating the DeFi apps.
Right. So I think that's a really interesting point, and it's obviously something that I want to discuss with you guys. It's been a passion of mine to try and work on for myself, having ways to use my Bitcoin without having to go through middlemen, and obviously my involvement with Sovryn is a big part of that. But before we get to that, if I'm not mistaken, you guys launched an app for Lightning Node. I think it was maybe a year and a half ago, but into the main Casa wallet, I think you still don't have Lightning built in. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
So do you want to speak to that? Because, for example, using Lightning is sort of one of those use cases where obviously we would like it to be self-custody, although we're seeing more and more wallets and perhaps a majority of users actually using custodial Lightning wallets.
Right. Yeah, it's a super interesting problem. So I guess the quick story on the Lightning app that we used to have, which talked to the Casa node, which was like the first plug and play, run your own Lightning node. We ended up discontinuing that just because the user experience wasn't great. Lightning was very early. This was back in 2018, 2019. And it was just there wasn't as much tooling back then as there is today. So what's great to see is now there's way more tooling built by multiple different companies that are enabling people to build on top of Lightning from a wallet perspective and a lot of other ways too. And so this is back in our kind of crosshairs now of how do we build we're like actively evaluating how can we build a Lightning wallet that has a great user experience but remains non-custodial. It's super hard, even some of the ones that just because of how Lightning works, even some of the wallets that are kind of praised as a great non-custodial user experience aren't really fully self-custody. Like Moon Wallet definitely operates in the gray area of whether they are self-custody or a custodial wallet. And then you've got places like Strike, which is a great experience, but is fully custodial. You've got Cash App, which is they're slowly rolling out some Lightning features to their users, fully custodial. It's definitely an interesting problem. Like, how do you get this non-custodial Lightning to work in a simple way while still letting people hold their keys? And it's tough.
Yeah. So Jameson brought up the experience of DeFi and MetaMask, and I think for me personally, Lightning has a lot of promise, but is an extremely complicated and at the same time limited technology because of the state channels and the routing requirements. And so one of the things that I've been of the opinion of and really attracted me to Sovryn when I learned about Sovryn was the approach being taken by Sovryn, which is let's look at what's going on in the rest of the crypto space. What can we learn from it for Bitcoin, and how can we bring those tools to Bitcoin? And I think it's quite clear that we've seen a far more adoption of smart contract based systems than we've seen of Lightning Network, at least up until now. Now, a lot of that has been things probably that we're not that interested in, or at least I'm not that interested in, a huge amount of ICOs and things like that. But out of that emerged things which I've been very interested in from the very beginning. Right, so this new branding of decentralized finance, right? It's self-sovereign trading or self-sovereign lending has been something that we've been talking about in the Bitcoin space for a long time. So I'm curious how you guys think about expanding the avenues that Bitcoin has for expanding the ways in which people can use Bitcoin without giving up the primary property that makes Bitcoin so powerful, which is that it is self-sovereign, or that you don't need to rely on trusted intermediaries.
I mean, I think this is really important for us to be going after as a community, because there's building up a competitive fee market for the base chain by giving Bitcoin more things that it can do is like a base security need of Bitcoin. And I think that is something that I know, like Jeremy Rubin's been talking a lot about this lately, and I tend to agree with him on a lot of what he's been saying. I think that building more functionality on top of Bitcoin is important, but it's also very important that we do it in a way that, we're not trying to turn Bitcoin into a Turing complete platform or something, which will obviously never happen for technical reasons, but it's one of those things where we have to be careful about how we do it. But building things on top of Bitcoin to extend Bitcoin's use cases is important, because I think it's a good point that you look at what is going on in DeFi and some of the other areas or other chains, and there's a lot of real value flowing through those systems, and it's showing at, you can argue about how much of that demand is fake versus real, but it's showing that there is at least some material amount of demand for those types of services. And I personally would love to see things like this, and I know this is exactly what you guys are working on, right? But I personally would love to see very usable products that let you borrow dollars against your Bitcoin without having to go through BlockFi or something like that. I feel like you should have that range of opportunities as a individual who uses Bitcoin, and it's a sovereign money. You should be able to decide what you do with it. And then second, I think it's good for Bitcoin if you can extend what's built on top of it in order to make it more usable and build up a more competitive fee market. I don't know if Jameson, maybe you probably have some good stuff to add to that.
Yeah, it's tricky. You'll definitely get pushback, I think, if you ever try to suggest that Bitcoin should be a more generalized protocol and support all types of functionality. However, the great thing about having a permissionless network, being able to build multiple different layers, is that you go off, you build your own layer, and there's really nothing anyone can do to stop you. So this is why Sovryn is taking a path where it doesn't really matter who disagrees with what you're trying to do. No amount of whining or complaining is going to be able to stop you from continuing to build that out. And you basically get to build your own market and see who comes.
Right. So, I think there's been a number of approaches around how we do this. One of the big ideas for probably since that 2014 has been the idea of sidechains. And I think sidechains are amazingly powerful. And we've seen, a number of important things being built out. For example, with Liquid, there's an effort now to do a bond issuance for El Salvador. Sovryn has hundreds of millions of dollars which are managed by users while controlling their keys. Tens of thousands of users using the system, and this has all grown out of the last 8 months of it being live. So we are seeing important and significant traction with sidechains. However, and here we come back to sort of, I think, Jameson, really your expertise and the expertise of the Casa team, right? We are still very reliant on multi-sig pegs for the ability to use your Bitcoin on these sidechains. And I'm curious, what one of the criticisms that sidechains gets is, well, it's not really Bitcoin, or it's not really properly decentralized because it's using these multi-sig pegs. And obviously, I think there's lots of things that we can do to improve and reach greater and greater levels of trustlessness around our pegs. I'm curious, Jameson, how you think about sidechains and pegs, the security considerations there, and also maybe we can talk about how you think we could improve things in the future.
Yeah, I mean, the trustless two-way peg, I think, has been the elusive thing that we've wanted to see for many years. I'm pretty sure the original Sidechains paper that Blockstream published vaguely mentioned something about two-way pegs, and like research is ongoing, so on and so forth. But so far, I think the only real proposal we've seen around that is drive chains, and I think Paul Stork has been working on that for 5 years, if not longer, and that last I heard, I think they were getting a test net up and running. So hopefully we'll continue to see slow but incremental progress on that. And I know that there are, some technical criticisms of the security model for that, it's not necessarily perfect, but I suspect it's probably arguably better than any multi-sig federation pegging mechanism that you could come up with. So, that seems, at least for the foreseeable future, to be the most plausible path forward, unless we have some major breakthrough announcement around a different, trustless two-way pegging mechanism. But I agree that, that is a very important consideration with regard to the security, because you're basically talking about the security of all of the funds of this entire new network that it's still being linked to Bitcoin, but it does not share 100% of the security properties of Bitcoin.
Right. So I think there are a few ways besides drive chain where in the future we may be able to introduce trustless pegs, perhaps even better than drive chain. So I think at the far end, but rapidly improving from a cryptographic and technological perspective, is zero knowledge proofs and the ability to have zero knowledge proof based peg. There is work which has introduced this as, there is a testnet live which is doing this. I think Paul Stork with his BIP300 drive chain actually does have already a testnet up and running. And so that also would be a higher degree of assurance. And then there's also potentially various ways that we can use Taproot to create much larger groups of signatories. And then, you can have, instead of cryptographic assurances, you could introduce potentially economic assurances, which is part of what the TBTC team have been working on. And then there's also all kinds of other things. So, for example, the rootstock chain is using effectively HSMs and are looking to introduce attestation as well. And so, you kind of have the spectrum of different solutions. Some of them are live now and managing decent flows, and some of them could probably, work already, but it would take several years to get them into BIP form and get that BIP accepted as part of consensus. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts, like, in terms of people, for example, using rootstock, right? How do you feel about the security assurances of the peg where it is today? And maybe I'll just add, like, the way I think about it. I think if we can get people maybe even just the early adopters using things like Sovryn and rootstock, that proves the use case and also introduces the community to the value there, which then makes it so much easier to get things like BIP 300 or potentially zero knowledge proofs introduced into main chain consensus, and that could actually reduce the amount that we need to change main chain in the future. So I'm curious, like, how do you feel about the current state of multi-sig pegs? And I think we could use rootstock as an example.
As far as I know, both Liquid and RSK have been operating for years without any security incidents, and I believe we're talking about like 1,000 Bitcoin or so at least that the peg is operating. So it's not trivial. It's a decent honeypot, I guess, for people to try to attack it. But this is kind of like trying to talk about the security of the Bitcoin network with regard to hash rate and centralization and all of that stuff. Is that all we really know is that it has worked well so far, and that the longer it continues to work, the more confidence that we have that will continue to work. But you can't really put together like a formal security proof or anything to convince people that there won't be any problems in the future. So, I consider it, less secure than, Bitcoin as a system overall, but that it probably has more than sufficient security for the levels of value that it's dealing with now, and probably even much higher levels of value. So it's one of those things that's kind of hand wavy, but it's also, I think, worth continuing to investigate and improve so that we can get, if you can move to something that is more, I guess, math-based, like zero knowledge proofs, that could definitely provide, I guess, a better, like, formal security proof of what is the actual level of security of this thing. Can we actually quantify it?
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's very helpful when you can actually provide a formal proof. This is exactly to the 18th decimal how secure it is. All right. So I think one last question for you guys, and then maybe we can open up to questions from our listeners. Right. So I think one of the key things, and one of the interesting things about Casa and your story is you guys started thinking about how do we give people the ability to share access to homes using public key cryptography and using the Bitcoin blockchain. And one of the remarkable things that Bitcoin has done and crypto has done is create this huge incentive to invest in security systems, right? People create ways for people to hold private keys securely in a way that's never existed before. Now, I actually think I was expecting there to be more innovation in the space than has happened, but it has still created a huge amount of incentive, and has introduced millions and millions of people to this idea that they can identify themselves online and can hold value by holding private keys. So what are your guys' hopes in terms of how do we take this beyond just Bitcoin custody, and where do you see this potentially impacting other parts of the world? Like, hyper-Bitcoinization could be the growth of Bitcoin as a reserve asset, but it also could see the logic of more institutions and more parts of our lives starting to look more like Bitcoin. So I'm interested in sort of like your blue sky thinking around that.
So I think that this is one of the things that got me excited about private keys in the first place. Private keys have been around, I don't know, decade, 50 years or something like that. But not until Bitcoin did people really have an incentive to learn about and use private keys beyond just a very small group of kind of engineers and enthusiasts. Like I think back when PGP was first invented, there was this idea like this could revolutionize your identity online, and it just really didn't catch on in a mass market way because it was hard to use and there was no incentive behind it. Well, Bitcoin gave people that monetary incentive to use private keys. And in my opinion, that kind of opened the gates for people to finally understand why these are beneficial. It gave companies like Casa a incentive and reason to be building better experiences around private keys. And then in the future, I think that this helps people to actually take control over more areas of their life. And they can use private keys to do that. Quick side note, Jameson just messaged me and said his Twitter crashed and it's not letting him back in because it says he's a co-host. So if the host is able to boot the current Jameson, I think he might be able to get back in then.
Sure thing. One moment.
So but what's really interesting about a private key is that it's a much better form of authentication of digital authentication than basically anything else that we have today. So you look at usernames and passwords, and there's just so much of a flaw with those in terms of how those are used to authenticate people online. And you can actually build a much more secure, much simpler user experience by building something where people are logging into websites or authenticating themselves online with a signature from a private key. And so something like that just really gets me excited about the potential here. It feels like it's a little ways off still, but within the Bitcoin and broader crypto community, I think is where this will start to happen and where we will see the early adopters of private keys as identity, and then it grows out from there. But if we're able to successfully transition people on a mass scale to using private keys to secure and authenticate themselves in much more than just their money, I think you just open up so much potential for people to be able to have a more control over what matters most to them, to be more secure in their lives, and generally to it just unlocks quite a bit when you talk about what can happen with your online kind of digital life. So that gets super vague and hand wavy, I realize, but I think that the primitives of private keys are the core building block that you need for all of that other stuff to happen. And so that's really what gets us excited and why we've been so focused on keys at Casa.
Awesome. Jameson, you want to jump in on this? Are you able to at this point? Oh, awesome. You're back.
Yeah, I probably missed the question because it turns out that changing your phone orientation on my phone crashes Twitter Spaces. But it sounded like Nick was really just referring to the fact that we see keys as the fundamental concept for securing your sovereignty, and that Bitcoin is the first, I think, obvious step just due to the amount of value that has been placed in the system. But this is going to be a diverse and decentralized set of systems, and private keys are going to be powering quite a few different things, whether it's your identity or ownership of other assets, or control over your own data, hopefully. If we're really talking about privacy, having finer tuned control over exactly who can interact with your various data that can be sensitive. There's a million different ways that we can see this going, and at Casa we aren't necessarily trying to predict which specific cases are going to take off. We want to continue to survey the entire ecosystem and see what the evolution of best practices and hardware and software that are available to us that we can then package up and make as accessible as possible to our clients.
100%. And, I think, if we do a good job, we can rebuild a lot of the world to look more like Bitcoin, right? The internet can be more decentralized. Our institutions can be more borderless and permissionless, and our money can be more rules-based, and our entire world can be more rules-based. But I don't think any of that happens unless people are empowered by taking control of their keys and using those keys to control their property, their identity, their funds, etc. And so really it's empowering the individual to control their destiny in all of its digital forms that I think you guys are working on. And I think it's such a huge mission, and it would be awesome if there were more competitors like Casa, for me, not maybe for you, but the fact that you guys have done it is awesome. So I'd like to turn back to the Sovryn host, and we can pick some questions from the listeners.
Yes, folks, please submit your requests now, and we will put you on board here. In the meantime, we're wondering here at Sovryn, did you have any questions, Jameson and Nick, for Yago or for Sovryn in general, that while we're waiting for people to sign on?
I don't have a question off the top of my head, but one of the things that I was kind of thinking about just in terms of what you guys are building, and then also how you were just talking about reshaping the world to be more like Bitcoin. And one of the things that's just really interesting to me is that at its core, Bitcoin is a permissionless protocol, right? Anybody can build whatever they want on top of it. And that just opens up the world in general to so much more innovation from so many more places and people. And what I find really cool about it, like thinking, even going back even to the conversation about how important is a trustless peg, and how are the pegs into sidechains like Rootstock today, how secure are they, that kind of thing. I think that what's so interesting about this is like you guys can be building Sovryn, and people who it's really a free market exercise. The people who want to use that and trust the peg, they decide they trust it and they want to use what you guys are building, they can do that. The people who don't want to do that and really look at their Bitcoin as, I want to have zero risk for my Bitcoin, I'm keeping it in cold storage, they can do that too. And so this, like when you're talking about building new systems that reshape the world to fit around Bitcoin, I think it really comes down to the permissionless nature of the protocol. And unlike our current system, you don't have to use what is being built by others. There's way more options for you to choose from, and you can make the trade-offs with your money that you want to. And so somebody may not like what Rootstock does or what Sovryn does. Well, they don't have to use it. And so that's just something to me that I think over a longer time horizon works out very positively for what's being built in our ecosystem and for the people around the world, because people just have more free choice in what products and services that they want to participate in with their money. And I don't know, I get excited about that.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of the maxims, I believe, is, the more people who are going to live under a rule set, the more minimalist the rule set needs to be, which is one of the genius things about Bitcoin main chain is it's a very, very minimalist rule set. It's not trying to do everything. It's not, one of the things it's not trying to do is all of the smart contracts in beta are incomplete. And that's because when you're trying to build the reserve currency or a monetary institution for the world, monetary institution that's going to be used by the entire world, that's going to be used by everyone. And so the rule set needs to be extremely minimalist because you need everyone to be able to come to consensus around it. And then on higher and higher levels of like more specific, more detailed, thicker rule sets, right? So for example, Sovryn is building a financial layer on top of Bitcoin. A financial layer has way more rules and needs to have way more rules than a monetary system, right? Monetary system is, there's going to be this number of coins. You can transfer them in this way. That's basically it. The financial system, far more complicated. It's trading. There's systemic risk that you may want to be able to balance out. Like with Sovereign, for example, we don't allow the system to become overwhelmed by centralized stablecoins because they would introduce centralization in the back door, right? But that's a much more nuanced, complicated rule set. And so you want to build that not inside Bitcoin main chain, but on top of Bitcoin main chain, like Bitcoin Layer 2, through sidechains and other technologies like that. And so I do think, sort of having this like federated system where the more significant the rules, the more localized they need to be, and people need to be able to opt into that. So I completely agree with that. All right. So should we turn to questions?
And I actually probably need to go in a couple of minutes anyway. So if we don't have any questions, then that's okay too with me.
Okay, folks, last chance for questions.
Yeah, I see 3 or 4 requests, so I think if we can keep them short. I'm gonna invite Mr. Freeman and Orange Pearl. You can ask after him. Yeah, it seems they are struggling to connect, or is this only on my side?
Yeah, I don't see anybody. Now I see a couple.
Salmon T, I think you were the first, so go, shoot.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, guys. So I'm actually a Casa customer, and I love the product. And at a point now where kind of the upgrade to the next tier for me kind of makes sense. So kind of the 3 out of 5 multi-sig. I just find the sort of the cost of that to be sort of burdensome. So just want to get your thoughts. Is there any plans to kind of maybe reduce that in the future? Because I really like the product. I don't want to kind of move it somewhere else. So I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so there's no plans to reduce it right now for people that it's pretty interesting. The reason that we aren't changing it is because we regularly hear from customers, like after they actually sign up or upgrade, like especially if they had price concerns before doing so, after doing it, we regularly hear from people saying things along the lines of, wow, this actually is cheap for what I'm getting here from a product and service perspective. And that comes down to the fact that we're adding in, at those higher tiers, we're adding in so much more service, both from a like hand-holding side of things, but also from a security side of things. So now at the 3 of 5 levels, when you are requesting the cost of recovery key usage, we're actually getting on a video call with you and making sure that you aren't saying your duress word and you're not under duress or anything like that before we sign with our Casa key. We have emergency contacts where if you are ever in trouble or under duress, we call the emergency contact that you've given us to let them know. So there's just a whole lot more that we add in at those higher tiers that are really useful for people that are at those tiers, and we can't really do that at a lower price. And so that's where we're at today. That could always change in the future, but yeah, that's where we are at on it as of now.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Thank you for that answer. And then that's just a follow-up question I have. What if, as the higher tier plans also includes like something, let's say something were to happen to me, and my spouse was not familiar how to do, how to use a cold card or how to sign a transaction. What would be sort of the game plan of something like that, just to make sure that, my family, my sons and daughter that ends up actually inheriting, the Bitcoin stash there. So what are the solutions you guys offer for something like that?
Yeah, so that's a big part of those higher tiers. Right now, we have this available at the diamond level, but stay tuned. We're looking into how we might be able to bring this at the platinum level. But what we do here is due to the way multi-sig works, there's specific ways you can set this up so that your heirs can access your keys if you were to pass away. And our client service team that works with those higher tier clients make sure ahead of time that you have everything set up as necessary. But then the even bigger benefit that I think people find comfort in is that if you were to pass away, a lot of people worry, just like you said, about whether their heirs could actually work the cold card or work the hardware wallets that they're dealing with. Well, that's what our service team is there for. They're there to actually walk your family through everything to make sure that they receive the Bitcoin that they own now after you've passed away, and that there aren't any kind of hiccups around that transfer process. It's a super important part of our service, and one that you really can't get elsewhere in Bitcoin self-custody. So that's the super high level view. If you ever want to dive into like more info, ask more questions, you can always book a call with our team on our website, and they will, spend all the time you want answering in-depth questions about how that inheritance process works.
Okay, thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks. I don't know how much time Nick and Jameson have, so I think we have time for, I'm hoping, 2 more questions. Mr. Freeman, you're up.
Hi there, guys. Thanks for having me. So there will be a question and a bit of info. So the question is actually that I think the security side is strictly connected to the privacy, because what Bitcoin is lacking of is the privacy aspect. And and how do you think about the price aspect of the Bitcoin, how it's going to be resolved in long term, because that's main part of the security. And second, that you were talking about the stable coins and also the privacy aspect and also the liquidity. So basically, there's already a solution that is being built, and I think there's not a lot of info globally about it, but one's gonna launch in Q1. It's the Shape protocol that is being built on Secret Network. So basically, what they're trying to achieve is a stable coin that is private by design and also maintain its peg with a combination of open market algorithm, arbitrage, as well as both staking treasury participation. And basically, what it does, it doesn't have the block-based inflation and is pegged to a basket of all these global currencies and commodities. So definitely could check out and learn more about that technological aspect that they're dealing with on Secret Network. Thanks.
I guess in terms of, network security, total market cap, total security spend on hash rate, thermodynamic security, that in particular is something that's been open to debate for many years. And it's another one of those things where, there's no one can come up with a formal proof that is going to be able to predict the future. The best that we can do, I think, is kind of what Nick was talking about earlier, that we want as much utility and as many use cases to be built onto Bitcoin and Bitcoin-linked systems to continue to accrue more value and thus continue to improve the spend for thermodynamic security of the network as a whole. So far, so good, I guess. in the sense that, despite the halving every 4 years, the total thermodynamic security of the network seems to relentlessly continue to increase year over year, while continuing to decrease as a total percentage of market cap. So, the open question being, of course, will the transaction fees become sustainable and eventually offset the block subsidy? I think we've had some brief periods where we got, I think, about halfway there. So it is certainly possible, but there's still a lot of work to be done. The stablecoin stuff, of course, is basically like its own it's really a whole other ball game, because there's so many different ways you can go about trying to build stable coins. And, especially with the algorithmic stable coins, these, they have great potential. I think that's a better way to go, rather than just having some central custodian holding a bunch of fiat currencies. But once again, you run into a lot of the sort of smart contracting complexity issues where there's potential exploits or edge cases that can be pulled off with things like flash loans and whatnot. So because it's so much more complex, it requires, I think, a lot more security engineering. But I am hopeful that we'll eventually get there. We'll once we have stable coins that have been mature and been around for many years, then that will continue to build the confidence that someone has finally found a solution that's not going to get hacked.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Orange Pold.
Thank you very much for doing this. Really appreciate your insight and knowledge. Apologize if my question is low level, doesn't make much sense, but you were talking about Lightning being on different arenas and they're centralized. My understanding was that Sovryn was going to integrate Lightning at some point, and I was curious if that happens, does that sort of remedy the centralization standpoint on that, or is that still a problem to do on a platform like Sovryn?
Yeah, so interesting question. So we've integrated Lightning in at least one way.
Off-ramps to Sovryn, as well as the ability through submarine swaps to perform trades. So you can interact with Sovryn as a trading venue and trade right now Bitcoin on Lightning Network to other types of assets that you might want to hold on Sovryn. Where we want to go from here is so there's a great number of people who are working on Lightning and Sovryn, and they are working on, among other things, bringing tokens to Lightning Network. Specifically, Bitcoin-backed stablecoins is the primary focus. There's also work to, and I think this is a very big deal for Lightning Network, an effort to allow channels to rebalance and to source liquidity using Sovryn and the rootstock sidechain as sort of a back office. So one of the problems is there's often like a mismatch of inbound liquidity, and you can work to mitigate that by moving some of the transactions off of Lightning and onto rootstock. And so there's a bunch of work currently being done to both work to make Lightning easier to use, more efficient, and more capable in terms of its capacity to, for example, manage Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, which is being done with Sovryn. And I think it's a very exciting path forward, because I think it can help grow Sovryn, I think it can help grow Lightning Network, and I think it can help grow use cases for self-custody.
Got it. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time, guys.
Sure.
Cool. And I actually need to drop, Yago.
Sure.
I apologize, but
No problem.
I really appreciate you guys having me on. This was fun.
It absolutely was.
Thank you very
We should
much.
do it again sometime. Jameson, are you able to stay for one or two more questions?
Sure.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So Ben, I think you're up next.
Hey guys, just a quick one. Jameson, nice to see you again. So if I'm a cheapskate Casa customer on the 3 of 5 and I pop my clogs, I presume my family could then call you upgrade to platinum and then you'd help them out from there on. Is that true, or are you kind of stuffed at that point?
So are you saying you were currently gold or platform or platinum?
Good question. Platinum. So if you're platinum and then you have an inheritance issue, can the family upgrade at that point to the top tier service and then get all the inheritance help?
Well, I mean, if it's after you've passed, that's going to be tricky, right? It's going to depend on what information we even have about you. So if you were an anonymous client, then that's a definite no. If you weren't anonymous, then we could probably make it work. But we would definitely need a high level of proof and certification of death, basically, before we would be comfortable proceeding.
Okay, so it's not a case that if the people you're speaking to have got access to the keys alone, that's enough necessarily. You do want to know that you're talking to the right. There is an identity verification aspect to it.
Definitely. So yeah, I mean, there's no one size fits all here because our different clients do different things and different clients are comfortable with sharing different levels of information with us. So it would depend upon what you had told us ahead of time. So yeah, if this is something that you want to be prepared for, definitely you'll want to have a call with your advisor to make sure that we have everything that we need ahead of time.
Awesome. Good answer. Thank you, Jameson. Take care.
You too.
All right. I don't know if we have additional people in the queue. It looks like we do not. In which case, I'd like to thank Jameson very much. It's been a pleasure using Casa. I'm looking forward to seeing additional developments in the future. Thank you very much for joining us here. We should have a conversation sometime soon about how we can do more to bring Sovryn to Casa users and vice versa. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Remember to stay sovereign, and we'll see you all again here soon.
Yeah, guys, don't forget to follow Jameson at Lopp, Nick at N Neuman, Eden Yago at Eden Yago, and of course, Sovryn at Sovryn BTC on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Thank you very much, Nick and Jameson, and thank you for everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of your day wherever you might be, and remember, stay sovereign. Cheers, guys.